The Gurkhas, respected by their allies, feared by their foes. Many call them the bravest of the brave. Boys from the hills of Nepal trained by the British to be the consummate global warriors, Gurkhas. The mere mention of the name Gurkhas is enough to set off a rush of emotions and stories from those who have fought against them and with them.
Our enemy against whom we've been operating has been totally unaware that the Gurkha has not only carried out a reconnaissance of his position, but actually crawled inside it and listened to his conversations in the trenches, taken some of his equipment and got away with a complete layout of the position on a plan.
For sport, Gurkhas used to slip through Japanese lines in World War II and cut the laces on the boots of Japanese sentries. There are even more chilling tales about what Gurkhas would surgically do to their enemies with their distinctive curved knives called kukris. The British first learned how fierce the Gurkhas are in combat when they fought against them in Nepal in 1814. After narrowly defeating them despite their overwhelming odds, the British asked the Gurkhas to join them. One British officer wrote, "I never saw more steadiness or bravery exhibited in my life. Run they would not, and of death they seemed to have no fear, though their comrades were falling all around them." Perhaps the greatest mystery surrounding the Gurkhas is how such naturally passive people have become such fierce fighters. Long before the term Rapid Deployment Force became the operative military buzzword, the British were dispatching their Gurkha battalions to hotspots around the world.
Well, the Gurkha is a natural soldier, that's the first thing. Of course, the background that he comes from makes him a hardened, durable human being. The Gurkha soldier will pay attention and do his job 24 hours a day without prompting. He somehow has his natural motivation and pride which makes him do that. When there's trouble about, it's nice to have a few of them around.
The Sultan of Brunei likes to have them around so much, he personally pays the British government the costs of keeping a regiment of Gurkhas in Borneo at all times to help protect his sultanate. As many as 200,000 Gurkhas responded to the British call for arms during World War I, with those not fit for infantry duty volunteering as ambulance drivers. From fighting in Europe and North Africa during World War II to guerrilla warfare in the Malay jungles in Borneo, the Gurkhas have created a legacy of being virtually undefeatable in combat.
He, at home, is often a hunter. He's used to moving around the countryside. And he makes a remarkably good infantry soldier, particularly in the bush or the jungle. He's silent and stealthy and very difficult to detect.
Above all, the Gurkhas have been fiercely loyal to the Queen and the British Army for nearly 200 years of distinguished service, not as detached mercenaries or cheap soldiers, but as professional members of an extended military family. They swear to serve for a minimum commitment of 15 years.
Gurkhas, go!
When a British officer once asked volunteers for a difficult parachute assault in World War II, only half the Gurkhas immediately stepped forward. As the story goes, the other half said they would go too, if only they could use parachutes. Real or imagined, the Gurkhas' mystique was their most potent weapon in the Falklands War. Just before the final attack on Port Stanley, the British leaked the plans for a Gurkha invasion. To the man, the defending Argentines fled, rather than learn firsthand if the Gurkha legends were more fiction than fact. The mountain kingdom of Nepal is a portrait of pastoral beauty and tranquility. The Nepalese have not gone to war against anyone in over a century. But for the past 100 years, many of Nepal's best young men have been fighting and dying for someone else's country. Nepal is also a portrait of lifelong poverty, with historically one of the world's lowest per capita incomes. Much of the Gurkha legendary dedication and determination comes from the harsh economic realities of life in Nepal.
They are subsistence farmers, hill farmers. The lad comes from a small homestead. Around it there's some fields which his father owns. They work those fields and attempt to produce sufficient food to feed themselves for the year. Now if you take a boy out of that family, as it were, you give them a double plus. It means there's one less person to feed, and also that person is in a position to send money home to contribute towards the family.
These economic facts of life have made soldiering a noble and rewarding profession for generations of Nepalese men wishing to raise their standard of living and opportunities as Gurkhas.
I was in Gurkha soldier for 21 years.
Throughout the year, retired Gurkhas called Gulliwalas regularly visit the mountain villages, scouting and screening candidates for yearly recruiting tests called hill selection. Most of the recruits come from Gurkha families like Jaskaji Gurungs, himself a former Gurkha, with one son already serving in the Indian Army, and now hoping his youngest son, Golman, will be selected by the British.
I want to become a Gurkha because they're going to army, then they earn money, and they buy some land, and they help their father, mother. So I also think about that,
A village boy's departure to join the Gurkhas is as important a passage in life as a wedding or funeral. If Naura Yan Gurung is accepted, he will not see his mother or family again for at least 3 years at his first leave. If he fails the tests, his disappointment and embarrassment will be so great he might never come home again. Golman and Naura are from the same village and are joining together. Since they were first selected by their local Gulliwala, they've trained together for 6 months for the demanding physical tests that will determine their potential as infantry soldiers and their chances for a new life as Gurkhas. The local hill selection tests take place but once a year and are by invitation only. Only 1 in 20 will be selected for the final testing at the British camp in Pokhara.
They've been trained for nearly a year to get through this test, and this stage here all the friends and their parents and the villagers are watching for them. If they fail any one part of the test, we just throw him out. That means they've lost their face, and some of them even they don't go back to their home and they try to disappear from here.
Each candidate is marked with an identifying chest number to eliminate any favoritism. The recruits must be at least 17 years old, 5 foot 3 inches tall, and meet other minimum physical requirements. The recruits are closely checked for scars, bad teeth, flat feet, any abnormalities that might lead to future medical problems. Golman and Naura scouted previous hill selection tests and trained together to pass this one. Golman was worried about his upper body strength and doing at least 12 chin-ups, while Naura practiced sit-ups 3 times a day to make sure he could do at least the required 35 on an incline in 2 minutes. The preparation paid off for Golman and Naura. They were 2 of the 4 chosen from this hill selection to head down to the British camp in Pokhara for more tests, evaluations, and competition. Some of the rejected have been known to have scraped the numbers off their chests with sand and walked days to find another hill selection test.
As I call out the numbers and come in with those who've passed, leaving behind those who've failed, my thoughts, I'm afraid, are always with those who've failed.
The pace and intensity of the selection process picks up at the British camp in Pokhara, where only the finalists from the hill selection tests can compete. Here, a simple running race becomes a climactic moment in a young man's life. Most are from the hill country and have never run on flat ground before, let alone with running shoes. The last event is the mother of all military fitness tests. Each man must climb 4 miles up a 4,000-foot mountain, carrying 70 pounds of rocks. The weight equals the equipment they must be able to carry as an infantry soldier in combat. Instead of a modern backpack, they use the bamboo baskets called dokos, which many have strapped across their foreheads and on their backs since they were children. Despite the load, heat, and altitude, these Gurkha hopefuls turned the doko carry into a high-stakes race and run for their lives. Those finally selected to be Gurkhas are anything but guns for hire or mercenaries without cause or allegiance. In a simple but profound ceremony, these Nepalese boys first swear their absolute allegiance to the crown while touching the British Union Jack. They sign a paper promising to serve the British Army for at least 15 years at a basic pay rate of about $300 a month. True to the Gurkha tradition, they will send most of the money home and stay in the British Army on an average of 22 years. Hong Kong could very well be another planet for the Gurkha recruits coming here for basic training. Most have never been on a plane, seen an ocean, or been in a big city before. Joining the 20th century and the rest of the world is as much a part of the Gurkha's transition as joining the army. The first weeks of training are a series of firsts, beginning with their first set of shoes and learning to do things together. Because of the language and basic cultural differences, Gurkha basic training takes almost a full year, nearly 3 times as long as their British counterparts.
Our soldier is still very much of an unsophisticated hill phenomenon. He's the sort of man who's had perhaps 5 or 6 years education in his school, has spent his entire life marching up and down, running up and down the hills of Nepal, the mountains of Nepal. And when he comes to us, is much more of a raw material than his British counterpart.
However, a Gurkha is generally much more physically fit for training than his British counterpart. More importantly, Gurkhas require far less disciplinary attention and motivation, and none of the bluff and bluster of most military basic training camps.
They don't require a great deal of noise and bluster to motivate them to do things. In fact, they react against that. If you shout at a Gurkha and show that you're unhappy with him, he will first of all giggle at you and think you're being funny. And if that infuriates you even further, he will just close up and not do what you want. A simple, polite word is all he requires.
When you put your lips together and go puh, 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 okay? Puh. Now say potential.
Potential.
Potential. And
Potential.
Again, potential technical recruit.
Potential technical recruit.
Much of the additional training time is for learning English and the new culture they have adopted. As part of their cultural exchange, all British Gurkha officers learn Nepali, both as a sign of respect and to ensure against any communication gaps under fire.
So त्यो पहिलो गेम खाली छ 2 तारिखमा छ नि त्यही दिनमा तपाई के काम गर्दैन भने आउने.
If the Gurkhas have any natural fears, it is a fear of water. For most, swimming isn't in their vocabulary or background of life experiences.
Some of them are afraid of water because they think they might get drowned. That's the reason why they're afraid of water.
Having lost more soldiers to drowning than in combat in Borneo, all Gurkhas are now trained to be good swimmers, however long it takes. By the completion of training, they must be able to pass the standard British swimming test. And true to Gurkha camaraderie, they like to make a race of it.
The men that we recruit are when they arrive, extraordinarily fit, run very fast, and when they've been fed up by us and received our training, they, at the end of it, are remarkably fit men.
On first encounter, they're very straightforward, they're very good-natured, they've got a nice sense of humour, but very quickly you discover they're also extremely hardy and stoical. And really it's that quality of stoicism, their ability to endure. They tolerate the circumstances that they find themselves in very readily and very naturally, and make perfect soldiers in this sort of respect.
Most of a Gurkha's natural strength is in his legs, from years of climbing and carrying heavy loads in the mountains. Basic training concentrates on their upper bodies, which are not as strong and must be developed through constant exercise. And by eating 3 full meals a day and dairy products for the first time in their lives. They are ordered to gain weight, and the instructors make sure it's good weight.
Primary, bearing, 6070.
Anytime, anywhere, any place that the Gurkhas have gotten the call to arms, they have responded without the need for heavy backup support most other British infantry regiments might require.
Victor Zulu, Juliet Golf, Oscar Charlie.
Gurkhas fire and maneuver through difficult terrain as a team confident of their mastery of fieldcraft and decided advantage over most of their adversaries in the bush.
They got a very good eyesight, but they don't have any basic knowledge of skill of how to hunt, but they do, and they can kill, and they got good shooting ability as well.
The ferocity of Gurkhas in combat is something that can't be taught. It's an instinctive trait that can only be refined in training and is rarely displayed and never bragged about.
There's a tremendous contrast between the reputation which Gurkhas have attained in war over the last 150, 60 years and their personal approach to life and the gentleness which they show each other, their British officers and all guests and strangers to the regiment. They are some of the most pleasant, easy to get to know and gentle people that I've ever met. And yet in wartime, when their temper arises and the situation needs it, they can forget all gentleness and be totally dedicated to destroying the enemy.
For their individual heroism, 12 Gurkhas received Britain's highest military honor, the Victoria Cross. British officers love to recount Gurkha stories, like the time a mortally wounded Gurkha was ordered not to die and didn't, lest he disobey an officer's order. Now, as an integral part of the British Army's Rapid Deployment Force, they are trained for a variety of combat situations in unfamiliar settings. In this state-of-the-art simulation of urban combat, they use live ammunition and explosives to test their abilities to react to the unexpected. Instructors control the action with explosions, sound effects, and change the scenarios with fake casualties and automated snipers. The Gurkhas' primary missions in recent history have been defensive. They have been largely responsible for sealing the border between Hong Kong and the People's Republic of China, which won't be one country until 1997. Day and night, they patrol the border for illegal immigrants trying to cross over to the Hong Kong side by cutting through the 19-mile fence that runs the length of the border. They have captured as many as 65 in a single day, using a variety of equipment ranging from sophisticated thermal imaging equipment to innocent-looking two-man teams on BMX bicycles, checking the fence for breaks and intruders along the 17-foot-tall fence. Armed with only sticks and their kukri knives, the Gurkhas set up nightly ambushes. They place extra detection sensors in the ground and check the more likely passage areas with night vision scopes. Their natural discipline and high morale allow them to maintain a high state of readiness night after night as they wait in the bush for somebody to test their 170-year-old tradition of following orders and securing difficult perimeters. The sound of bagpipes are as alien to Nepal as the sounds of war. Yet Gurkhas in the service of the British and the Indian armies have seen more continuous combat in the last 100 years than any other soldiers in the world. Gurkhas are not allowed to have their families with them for the first 5 years of their service. As Spartan as their life and quarters might seem to Westerners, these young Gurkhas enjoy a higher standard of living than they could ever expect in Nepal. This Gurkha's few personal possessions reflect the important things in life. A picture of his wife, who he won't see for 3 years at a time. Some precious possessions of military life. And the legacy of his father, who was a sergeant major in this same regiment. Even after their service is completed, a retired Gurkha's base pension of approximately $30 a month is critical to his family, his village, and the country of Nepal, which depends on Gurkha pensions and salaries as its third greatest source of foreign currency. The downscaling of the Gurkhas, along with the rest of the British Army, is going to have a major impact on Nepal's economy. But Gurkhas don't complain. Not even retired Gurkhas like 72-year-old Tul Bahadur Pun, better known as VC Saab for having earned the Victoria Cross. He single-handedly took out 3 Japanese machine gun positions in Burma, the last armed only with his kukri. It took him 6 days to walk down from his village for this interview on the subject of Gurkha bravery, one part of the Gurkha's legend that will never be a myth.
I think this is a genuine comment on the part of the world, but initially we Gurkhas ourselves didn't know that we are brave people, but upon our recognition, we also happen to realize that we are brave people.
The bravest of the brave is how a British regimental commander described the Gurkhas in his diary after a battle. Uncomplaining, you endured hunger, thirst, and wounds, and at the last your unwavering lines disappeared into the smoke and wrath of battle. Never had a country like ours had more faithful friends than you.
They have a saying which is often quoted, but it's very true. It's better to die than be a coward, and they live up to this.